Have you ever wondered how an invisible line on a map could be costing India billions of dollars every year? You're going from the crazy busy streets of Mumbai all the way to the calm and beautiful Arunachal Pradesh. As you're traveling, something weird catches your attention. Even though you've covered a huge distance, your watch hasn't budged. But the world outside? It's on a totally different schedule. The sun's doing its own thing, rising and setting at times that don't match your watch at all. This brings us to the quirky fact about India sticking to one time zone, a choice made a long time ago that's still messing with millions of people today. We're going to dive into the whole time zone saga, seeing how this one-size-fits-all time thing is shaking up the Indian economy, affecting everyday life, and maybe even messing with people's health. By the time we wrap this video, you'll get the lowdown on time zones and see how they're quietly shaping the lives of a whole nation. Stick around as we dig into a story about time, light, and cash, a narrative that impacts every Indian, but somehow doesn't get the spotlight it deserves. As we dive into the topic of time zones and their impacts, let's start from the very beginning, understanding what time zones really are. Time zones basically divide the world into regions that share the same standard time. Initially, people used to measure time based on where the sun was in the sky. This approach worked well when communities were small and isolated. However, with the advancements in transportation and communication, especially with the rise of railways and telegraph systems, there was a need for a more standardized way of keeping time. Meet Sir Sandford Fleming, a Canadian engineer who came up with a game-changing idea back in the late 19th century. What he thought of was pretty revolutionary, splitting up the whole world into 24 different time zones. Each zone would cover 15 degrees of longitude and represent a 1-hour time difference. He kicked things off by choosing the prime meridian, which sits in Greenwich, England, and marks 0 degrees longitude. This move laid the foundation for what we now call Coordinated Universal Time, or UTC. But back then, it was known as Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT. Now let's talk about the evolution of time zones. Fleming had this groundbreaking idea, but it actually took quite a few years for everyone to get on board with it. So, in 1884, there was this big international meridian conference where folks from 25 different countries got together to chat about what Fleming had proposed. And let me tell you, the outcome was huge. They came up with a standardized way of keeping track of time that completely changed the game when it came to global communication and coordination. This system wasn't just handy for international trade and travel. It also played a vital role in helping military operations run smoothly, especially during World War I and II. You know, even though we all agreed on these time zones globally, there's always these weird exceptions. Like, take China for example. It's this massive country, but they roll with just one single time zone. And then there's Russia, stretching across a whopping 11 different time zones. It's pretty crazy, right? These quirks often come from the politics and culture of each place and can sometimes lead to some interesting challenges and opportunities. Let's talk about Indian Standard Time, or IST. It's got a pretty interesting backstory. Before India gained independence, there were actually different time zones in the country. They had Bombay time, Madras time, and Calcutta time, all based on the local mean time of their specific locations. But then, in 1947, when India became independent, the government decided to simplify things. They wanted to make it easier for the railways and telecommunication systems, so they went with a single time zone, IST, which is set at UTC plus 5:30. The impact of this decision on the economy is huge. Trying to coordinate activities in a vast and diverse country like India comes with its own set of problems. Take, for instance, the northeastern states. Over there, the sun rises and sets way earlier than the IST tells us it should. This means we end up wasting a lot of energy because we're using lights and other electrical stuff when we could just be using natural sunlight. And on top of that, it messes with people's daily routines because they're not in sync with the natural light cycle. When we look at it globally, you can see that countries like the USA and Russia, which are pretty darn big, they've got themselves a bunch of different time zones. And the reason for that is, well, They want to make sure they're using their energy smart and getting the most out of their working hours. So, the USA, they've got 6 different time zones, and Russia, they've got a whopping 11. These countries, they've figured out that it's a good idea to match up their work hours with when the sun's shining bright, and that's helping them out economically and socially, big time. Now let's take a look at the unique Indian situation. India stretches about 3,000 kilometers from east to west, and because it's all in one time zone, there's a big difference in daylight hours, especially between the eastern and western parts. So, for example, when the sun goes down in Mumbai, which is way out west, folks in Kohima, over in the Far East, have already been in the dark for over an hour. This has sparked debates about whether India should go for multiple time zones or try other measures to better match up with the natural daylight cycle. This topic, it's got a lot of challenges and controversies going on. Some folks are all about having different time zones in India, saying it might make things more energy efficient and boost productivity, especially in the eastern states. But then there are others who are worried about how confusing and messy it could get, especially when it comes to getting around and staying connected. And don't forget the cultural and political stuff. People are concerned that having different time zones might make it look like our country's all divided up. Addressing this problem is pretty tricky. One thought is to add another time zone for the eastern states so that we can align natural daylight hours better with the regular working day. Another idea is to go with daylight saving time, where we tweak the clocks as per the season to make sure we get more daylight during the workday. It's a concept that's already in use in some countries, and it could be a good middle ground between just having one time zone and having multiple time zones. Technology has come a long way, and it provides some interesting solutions. With all these smart gadgets and automated systems becoming more common, India could use technology to tweak work schedules and energy consumption to better match the natural daylight hours without having to change the time zone. Looking at the bigger picture, the whole idea of time zones, it makes you wonder how we all deal with time on a global scale, right? I mean, can you imagine a world where there are no time zones? It's a bit of a mind bender, but it really gets you thinking about how time plays such a huge role in our daily lives and our economies, doesn't it? In the coming years, it looks like time zones are going to go through some changes. As we learn more about how time zones affect our economy and society, it's possible that more countries might start thinking about and maybe even adjusting their time zone rules. And you can bet that these changes will be influenced by new technology, money matters, and shifts in culture. To wrap it up, time zones aren't just some lines on a map. They tell the story of our history, culture, and economy. As we've shown in this video, the choice of time zone has a big impact on things like how much energy we use and our personal well-being. There's no one-size-fits-all answer, but the ongoing debate in India and worldwide shows that we need to really understand how time zones affect our everyday lives and the planet. As we keep dealing with this issue, it's clear that talking about time zones will stay important and relevant.